Hi, everyone. First, I want to introduce myself. I am Megan Lenzke. You might have seen me in some of our lectures. If not, that's okay. I wanted to present to you my diversity lesson that I created for our Teaching and Learning 330 class. My lesson is on the Native Americans, specifically for third graders. This is when they'll start learning a little bit more about U.S. history and Washington State history. So I thought this was a good lesson to start for third graders. So our content objective for this lesson is that the students will have a better understanding of the surrounding areas here in the Tri-Cities, such as Spokane and Yakima, and a little bit about the Native tribes and the history of Native Americans in the United States. I tied this specific lesson to one of our Common Core standards. I know we didn't have to, but I wanted to kind of throw it in there just so that we can start practicing seeing these so that here in the next year or two, or whenever we as individuals are graduating, we'll be a little more used to how to interpret our Common Core standards into a standard lesson for our classroom. So the one that I picked was for third grade. It says, by the end of the year, read and comprehend informational text, including history and social studies, science, and technical text at the high end of the grades, second and third text complexity, band independently and proficiently. So a connection to our students' background, experience. Because I personally plan on staying here in the Tri-Cities once I am graduated and get my first teaching job, I wanted to connect it specifically to our Tri-Cities kids. I plan on doing my practicum this coming fall at Pasco. I currently work in one of our Pasco elementary schools, so I constantly have my students in mind. So I wanted to connect it to them by introducing to their surrounding areas where they live or might have been to. I know a lot of our students have either been to or at least heard of Yakima, Spokane, different surrounding areas where we have some of those tribes. So I wanted to kind of connect it to more of our locals because they've already heard those names before, especially if they've already been to different places like that. I also wanted to connect it to the minority groups. I know here in Tri-Cities, we have a nice population of Mexican Americans and other minority groups. So I wanted to kind of connect them to those minority groups as they identify as a minority group, and Native Americans are considered a minority group as well. So I kind of wanted them to be able to have that connection between them and their experiences, but also the experiences of Native people, both now and previously. So for our lesson sequence and activities, the first thing I wanted to do for this Native American lesson was to start with a know, want, and learned chart. I remember growing up doing these kind of charts, and I still see them being used today. So I kind of wanted to start off with that. That way, you or I, as an educator here in the near future, we can kind of get an idea of what our students already know based off of books that they've read, other classes they've had in the past, and teachers, what they've heard from those teachers, and what they might have heard from friends and family and older siblings who might have taken similar courses in their experience. If you don't know what a KWL chart is, I definitely think you should look into those. They're very nice for teachers to see what your students already know, what they want to know, so you can kind of base it off of. But then at the end, you can see an overall picture of what they learned, but it also gives the students the same kind of idea of what they know, what they want to know, questions that they want to ask, and then at the end, they can see how much they've actually learned and if they got those answers to those questions that they had. The next piece I wanted to use for this lesson was this video game that I found. I did a little research to find different activities that you can kind of implement in a lesson plan. I found this, and I've seen a lot of posts from teachers who said that they use this because of how engaging it is for their students. I attached the link down at the bottom in case you wanted to go check this out. This video game is a good way, I think, to introduce students to the topic of Native American and Native American history, because in the video game, it gives the student this perspective of being an Indian, and going through these different situations that are similar to ones that Native Americans in the past would have experienced, to get them kind of interested in an understanding of kind of what they might expect to be hearing a little bit from. I actually played this game for a little bit. It's more of a narrative story game, so it's not a video game where they have to jump and move around different obstacles. It's more of a reading and listening kind of game, where interactive characters that they come in contact with will actually speak to them and talk to them, and then they get a couple different answers that they can respond with, and then they kind of lead their own story as this Native American boy. I thought it was pretty interesting because of trying to stay on topic and getting this project finished. I didn't go through it all the way, but I do want to see kind of how it ends. Like I said, I do work with elementary schoolers currently in an after school program, so I'm kind of excited to see what they might think of this once I can see them and start doing a little more things with them once they start going back to school and I can actually go back to work. So if this is something that you want to use also, that link is there at the bottom. So the next piece I wanted to do for this lesson is to introduce a vocab or vocabulary for the lesson. I found a document which I will attach in the discussion post of a pre-thought out lesson. There are definitely some pieces in there that I didn't want to use because it might be hard to find those exact materials. So that's why I kind of put that video game in there. The video game was not part of the original lesson plan, but I took pieces and parts of this lesson plan that I found to put together my lesson plan. So for the vocabulary that it gave me were the ones here on the screen. After finding this, I kind of saw a connection with some of the documents that we found while doing our research for our Native American tribe assignments not too long ago, such as watershed, erosion, spawning, salmon, those different kind of words. So those actually applied to a document that we found that I actually will use in this lesson plan, as you'll see here in a little bit. But you want to go ahead and explain to your students what these each mean if they don't know already. Make sure they don't have any questions. This lesson does kind of go into what watershed means, so that one you might be able to be flexible with, but some of these other ones you'll definitely want to talk with them, explain to them what they mean, and make sure that they have a good understanding of those words as well. So the next thing you want to do is begin a class discussion on salmon, which is kind of where we're starting to get into a little more on that document that I was talking about. So the first thing you want to do in this part for this class discussion is kind of talk as a class about what they already know about salmon, what they've learned from at home, books, or school, and then have them talk with their partners, especially if they are in a table group setting. It's really easy for them to kind of bounce ideas off. That way, if there are some students who don't know or have not heard of this kind of stuff before, if you want to go around and select certain students and have them raise hands and kind of give examples, those students who don't know what to say or have not heard about these specific things before can kind of get an idea of what they could say so they can still participate in class. Another thing you can do here that is seen is ask them a couple of these questions and have them raise their hand if they can relate to these different topics, such as have you seen salmon in the river and or streams? Have you eaten salmon? Do you like salmon? Have you read books about salmon? I know a lot of our students over in Pasco do fishing, so they may or may not have eaten salmon. They may or not have been fishing for salmon or seen salmon in rivers. So this would be something interesting for me to hear about as well in the topic of my own personal students at work. We also want to allow our students to share out what they've learned in those books or at home or from peers, and kind of have them explain as a group what maybe the salmon life cycle is, the different types of salmon, just to kind of get their brains thinking about the topic, and kind of get a little more interested in it. And then the last thing is ask them, has anyone ever heard the story of Salmon Boy? This was one of those pieces in that lesson plan that wanted you to get a specific book that had that story in it, but the document that we found for our previous assignment that I have put into this lesson plan actually has it at the end of the packet. So I'll also attach that document with that story in it in case you wanted to use this. You already have the story. You don't need to go to a library or try to hunt down the book, which is why I said I kind of maneuvered it a little bit. So this is the handout, the activity book that I said that we had talked about previously in our last assignment. So what you'll want to do is have a printout of these. I don't know if you want to use the whole packet or if you just want to take certain pages out of this and make copies of those, because I know printing copies isn't very inexpensive. So it's really up to you how you want to do it and how many students you have in your class. But I would recommend at least making sure that you have handouts of some of the activities that you want to use in this book, this packet, and then you'll also want to make sure that you have copies of that story and the passages also. There are a lot of pages in here that you may not want to use, so making sure that you at least have those, and even if the stories and the passages are something that them and a partner can share, and then making sure you have those activities printed out for each individual student is another way that you can minimize the number of pages that you probably don't want to print out. But what you want to do is go ahead and pass out those little bit of packets. Also on this PowerPoint, if you click on the link where it says Salmon Homecoming, you should be able to pull up the PDF, but I will attach the PDF in my discussion post as well, just to make sure that you have that. Then you'll want to go through and read out loud or do popcorn reading, which is basically just having students take turns reading the story about Salmon Boy, which I said is in this packet, so you won't have to worry about looking for it. And then kind of discuss the story as a class. If they have any questions, if they don't know what something means, go ahead and explain that to them. If a student can explain it to them, that's also really nice too. Then once you're done reading that story, you'll want to go through and read 2 specific passages that are in this activity book. The first one is what is Salmon Homecoming, and what salmon mean to Native Americans. The first one, what is Salmon Homecoming, it kind of explains what a watershed is and different pieces about salmon. And then what salmon means to Native Americans is the piece where it specifically talks about why in their culture it's so important to them and the different different things that they use it for, which kind of ties them back to the game that they might have been playing and what they might have saw in that game, but also about the salmon and learning about their culture, and different things like that. Then after you've read those passages, you've discussed those in class as a class, answered any questions students may have, that's when you can let your students do those activities that you decided on. There are a couple different cool ones in there. There's one that's like color by number, which is actually pictures of salmon that they have to color by number. It tells you what number is what color, and then they can color that. There's ones where there's word scrambles. I think there's a word search in there. There's also a board game that gives you the game board itself, the pieces, instructions, all that. So if you wanted to have them do that as a table, that's something that you can print out and have the students share. You can even probably get them laminated if you wanted to and save them for the next year if it works out well. Really up to you. I know students like to color and do fun little things, but they're also kind of taking in information at the same time. So that's why I think this packet's really nice to kind of sum up the whole activity, giving them something a little more fun to do than just sitting there and listening to stories all day long. Then once you're done with that, you do want to go back and make sure that you finish this KWL chart. They've already filled out the first 2 columns, the know and the want to know. So you want to make sure that they fill out the what I learned column. This kind of gets them to summarize up everything what they learned, making sure they got their answers to the questions that they had. If they didn't, this can be kind of the time where they can ask, and you can kind of fill them in on those pieces that they may not have gotten answers for in those previous activities. And then for your assessment, you want to use an exit ticket. For students as young as 3rd grade, you don't really have too many assessment tests like you see in more like middle school, high school, and on. So this is kind of a way for you to make sure that they've taken in the information that they needed, but in a calmer way that kind of makes them feel a little more confident in what they've learned. You also want to make sure, if you don't want to use these questions, to make sure that they're open-ended. It gives them a little bit more of a reason to think and process what they learned and get that information down. So the first question I personally picked for my exit ticket assignment was explain what a watershed is, which is what they will have learned in one of those passages. Why are salmon important to Native Americans, which is another piece of that passage. They can put one or a couple, but you can see if like what they comprehended and what they found that they can understand. That way, if like you have a couple different options to make sure that they understood, but if not, you can see where they might have misunderstood something. And the last one is kind of more of a personal question for them. What was the most interesting thing you feel you learned about Native Americans? This kind of gets them to think about what their most interesting piece that they learned was, to kind of give them an idea of what they're interested in for later on, and something that you can kind of see what kind of pieces and parts each different student kind of found interesting to them. So that is everything that I have. If you have any questions for me, my contact information will be in that discussion post like we are assigned to do. If not, I really hope you found this lesson plan to be helpful for you in the future. If not, and you have a different twist that you want to do on this lesson plan, that's totally up to you. And I hope you guys had a great semester, and I hope you guys do well in the future.